everyone. Welcome to another edition of Drummer Nation. This is one of the ones we're calling Trading Fours because there's four of us and we're drummers. Let's start by welcoming my esteemed cohort and partner in crime, co-host Adam Nussbaum. How are you, Adam?
Nice to be here, gentlemen.
At
Thank
his
you.
age, it's nice to be anywhere. I'm just kidding. We're the same age. All right, and we have a little different show for you today. I have an old friend that I've known for a long time. He used to be the chair at Berkeley College of Music, right?
Either one.
Either one, okay. Anyway, his name is John Ramsay. Welcome, John. How are you?
Nice to be seen.
Well, I remember Ralph Peterson used to say, "We need you to keep appearing so we can keep reappearing."
Yeah.
Something like that. And then my new friend. That was recommended to me by John is Joe McCarthy. How are you, Joe?
Great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm delighted to catch up with you. I'll give you a little intro because we don't do a lot of background. We just hang as drummers here. But Joe has a band called the Afro-Bop Alliance Big Band, which is amazing. And we're going to be hearing from it and doing excerpts and talking about it. But in 2008, he won a Latin Grammy for Latin Jazz Album of the Year. He was a teacher at North Texas, is that right?
I was a teaching fellow at North Texas
Right, well, that's
as
right.
a graduate student.
And
Yeah,
you went to school there too.
I did. Yep.
Yeah, I did too, years and years ago.
Awesome.
And a lot of instructional video out there. There's some play-along DVDs from all kinds of things. We're going to get to that too. Vic Firth lesson series. Anyway, I'm delighted to meet you, Joe. I'm surprised we haven't crossed paths before. It's my honor.
There's a lot of drummers out there, but it's great to be here. You guys are doing a great job with this podcast.
Well, John, thank you. Well, John, if this was your idea, so let me throw it to you. Where do you want to start?
Well, I don't want to forget to direct everyone listening, watching to Joe's website. It's really unbelievable. It's joemccarthymusic.com. So there's the plug for Joe's website.
It'll be in the show notes with everybody else's
Okay,
websites too.
excellent. Joe and I think, well, the first time I became aware of Joe's playing was back when I think I just started as chair, maybe 2008. And Dave Samuels brought me a CD. I don't think I had the play along part of it yet, but he brought me a CD. It was called Afro-Bop Alliance / Caribbean Jazz Project. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I listened to the CD. And, I had just done like 4 trips to Cuba to study percussion.
Ooh,
And
that's
so
on my bucket list, by the way.
yeah, it's amazing. But I listened to the CD that Dave gave me. And there was one track in particular, I think it was maybe Rendezvous or one of those, Joe, that I said, this sounds like 3 or 4 guys playing percussion. But there's only one drummer listed. And that was my introduction to Joe's octopus approach to drum set playing. And it scared me to tell you the truth. But since then, Joe and I become friends. Didn't we have a dinner at one of the PAS conventions?
Yeah. Our
Louis-
annual get together.
Yeah, yeah. So we were talking a little bit earlier about your background, and one of the things that struck me about your approach is you really have incorporated all the elements of the Afro-Cuban style, all those things like cascara and clave and palitos or wah-wahs, they might call them in Cuba, abanicos, and that is a mastery unto itself. But there's also the other side of it, which is big band chart interpretation. And you just seamlessly weave all those elements together, and it's just like I said, I've got to pick this guy's brain about how he conceives of this. So we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you went to Hart in Hartford, Connecticut, Hart School of Music,
Yes,
and that you studied with Al Lepak.
I did.
First of all, let me ask you this, because I don't know if I ever have. Are you from Connecticut
I
originally?
am. Yes.
Okay. So you and Al
Where?
have a connection.
I grew up right outside of Hartford, and I don't know if you guys know, but Mr. Lepak had a very close connection with the Picaro family, Joe Picaro and Emil Richards, and all those guys are from Hartford.
Right.
And there was another older bebop drummer in town by the name of Art Peretta, who played with Tony Pastor, and he played with a bunch of people, and he was the one who sort of directed me to Mr. Leapak, and he was like, you need to go study with him, and I certainly wasn't prepared, but I somehow got in there, and that was quite an experience.
So one of the things that struck me about your playing is that it's almost coming from like a orchestral percussion approach. And I know you mentioned that you were studying with Al Leapak. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you did with him. I imagine it would have been timpani and all the mallets, marimba, vibraphone, and but you had a little secret on the side of that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Adam will know this guy, but well, everybody knows this guy. But I was studying with Mr. Leapak, and back in those days, he was one of those teachers where we didn't specialize in anything. I really just wanted to play the drum set is what I really wanted to do, but that wasn't to be had, and it wasn't in those days back when you did exactly what your teacher said, which is kind of a thing of the past. But he didn't give us the choice. It's like you're going to play drums, you're going to play timps, you're going to play mallets, and all this. And so the drum set stuff with him was basically out of his drum set book, which is a very interesting book. It's called Control and Phrasing for the Drum Set. It's a wonderful book, but it's not your typical drum set book. So there was this guy in town, you probably haven't heard of him. His name is Ed Soph, who was teaching in Hartford at Bob Gatson's music store called Creative Music. So because they were two very big percussion personalities at that time, it wasn't really proper etiquette for me to be studying with two people. So I would sneak off campus on Mondays, and I would go take my drum set lesson with Ed. And Ed would give me a severe behind whooping in a completely different way. Leapak was very quiet. But anyway, so he played with this big band in town called the Chick Chicketti Big Band. And so he would teach all day, and then he would go and play in this band. And those are the charts that we studied with John, and I were talking about that. And not only was he an amazing teacher, but then he would play with the band, and he would put his money where his words were, and it was the greatest education I received. And then I started subbing in the band when he decided. I'm so old that he was there before he went to North Texas, and now obviously he's retired from there. But that was the combination of those two guys sort of just changed everything for me. So.
Well, Ed's a real a friend of the show here, and has been on many times. And I always compliment him by saying, as a teacher, he has great students all over the place, and none of them sound like him, and none of them sound like each other. So that's kind of a highbrow compliment to a teacher of that stature.
You're so right. And I think one of the things about Mr. Leapak and Ed was that they were so great because they taught you how to problem solve. And there was no spoon feeding, and obviously if you weren't prepared, we all know what the other end of that was, but it was like just learning how to think, and Leapak didn't say anything. He was very quiet, and Ed was, Ed's a extremely intelligent person, so you learned right away that, it wasn't just going to be about just reading pages of exercises. It's like, learning how to think, and I think that's why his approach to big band drumming has been so successful with not only himself but his students, because he taught us how to think, and it wasn't just, read this exercise and read this exercise. It's like, figure out your own damn exercises, and so that's what helped me the most, learning how to problem solve and to understand the importance of interpretation, so.
Yeah, Ed gave me, we were talking before, my early years, I was driving 90 miles, 180 miles round trip from Western Mass to study here in Lexington with Alan Dawson. And then when I started at Berkeley, I was reverse engineering, and I was driving about 200 miles round trip to Hartford to study with Ed at Gatson's place. So, but those behind whoopings that you mentioned, at the risk of embarrassing myself, I'll tell you my quick Ed Soph first lesson story. So I had just started teaching at Berkeley. I'd come off the road with Art Blakey, hadn't played in his big band, and so I meet Ed for I really went to him specifically for chart interpretation because Alan didn't really have a pedagogy for that. I think I mentioned to you earlier. But so my first lesson with Ed, I'm like, yeah, I studied with Alan Dawson, a long time. I played the Art Blakey big band, blah blah blah. He said, oh yeah, well, Ed, he's probably really reading the newspaper while I'm. He goes, oh great, so why don't you play for me? So I played whatever stupid thing it was that I played, and he's kind of listening, but then I stopped playing. He says, yeah, that's great. He said, yeah, I can hear you. You study with Alan. Yeah. He said, you know what? That's great. But, when you play, you look like you got a rope tied around your upper body.
I know what he means.
Oh, I knew what he meant. I mean, that was what I felt, So right away, it's like, then he proceeded to give me these. He said, I don't impose much on any of my students, but the one thing I do, he gave me these motion studies. But so, yeah, we've both felt the Ed Soph really revelations, I guess.
To your benefit, yes.
Absolutely. That changed everything for me. So with Lee Pack, did he smoke cigars in the lessons?
Always. And you know what the biggest, like you'd be playing and then a piece of the cigar would fly up onto the cymbal. But I have to tell you though, in a reverse direction, he ended up dying from throat cancer.
Yeah.
And I actually saw him right before he passed away, and it was pretty tough, But he very rarely did not. The only time he didn't have a cigar in his mouth is when he played with the symphony.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't have a cigar in his
Wouldn't
mouth
let him
when
do
he was
it,
on
yeah.
stage, But he was pretty much there all the time.
When did Lee Pack pass away?
Oh gosh, it's been a while now. I can't remember the year. I was still in the Navy. It's got to be like maybe 15 years now, maybe, or maybe even longer.
So just to get a little background on you, after you got out of North Texas and everything, you went into the Navy band?
I did. I was teaching in Fort Worth. I had a teaching job there, and I was subbing with the symphony. I used to sub a lot with the Dallas Jazz Orchestra. I don't know if you guys, I don't know if you ever heard of those guys, and played with them a lot, and some of the other big bands and things. And then one of my colleagues from Hart was in the Naval Academy band, and he said, we're looking for somebody. And so I auditioned, and then I moved to Annapolis.
That's a great gig. How long were you there?
I was there for 20 years.
And you elevated to the role of chief, right?
I did. Yeah.
I have a good friend who sends his hellos. I know you know John Emmerich,
Of course.
also a chief.
Oh man, I could tell some stories about John Emmerich, but I don't want to
me
get
too.
anybody in trouble.
Me too. But the thing I like about chiefs is they're going to get it done, man. They're going to get the job done. You might not want to know how, but they're going to get the job done. I was at a PASIC and I showed up with like a 20-foot truck, for the stuff for my company. And I had made arrangements to park it. And they didn't know anything about that. And they wanted like $300 for the night. I said, forget it. I'll find a way. So it's downtown Indianapolis. And John sees me. He said, what are you doing? I said, I got to park this thing somewhere. He said, move over. He gets in the truck. And we find there's a river there that's got a long parking lot. And it's red curb everywhere. And it says no parking after 6 o'clock. He said, go in there. I said, we can't park there. He had spotted the Old Guard bus, for the Army Old Guard.
Yeah, of course.
And with all the, bus was all decorated on the side. Pull up behind that. I said, okay, so give me a pencil and paper. He writes on there, military support vehicle.
Totally John Emmerich right there.
Do not ticket or tow.
That is John Emmerich to a T.
It'll be here in the morning, and goddammit, it was.
He was so good at that kind of stuff.
That's Emmerich. He's great. He's brilliant as well.
He was always coming up with stuff all the time. He was always one of those guys, like the MacGyver of the percussion world.
So
he's
moving
a great
ahead,
guy.
John, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. This is what we do.
It's a hang. I like to equate it to the bar at PASIC
No, it's interesting.
without the alcohol.
Listening to you guys, I'm realizing, I have a number of close friends who were in military bands. My college mate from UMass Amherst was Tom Briggs, and he was the drummer for the Coast Guard band, all from Connecticut. And then a former student and then a Berkeley colleague teacher was Henrique de Almeida, who was the drummer for the Falconeers, for the Air Force band.
Yeah.
It's good training.
It's a good gig, man. It was a damn good gig.
So
Yeah.
You got a steady paycheck, baby. And
Yeah.
you're working, you're playing, and you got benefits.
Yeah,
Yippee-yi-yo-ki-yay.
And you weren't dodging bullets either.
You're
so-
right, man. It
Steady
was,
gig.
once you figured out what was going on,
Yep.
the academy bands were on a collegiate schedule. So, it was, other than, outside things, you kind of quickly figured out what was going on. And so that's kind of when I sort of started my other part of my life.
Well, with this disparate background you have, what steered you to Latin music?
When I was at Hart, a couple of the guys that I went to school with were heavily into Afro-Cuban music, but it was like at that time, and in a lot of the collegiate programs, there wasn't really an Afro-Cuban ensemble, So with us being at Hart, we were able to get into New York, obviously, quite a bit and absorb as much of that as possible. After I got to Annapolis and got settled, I realized that there is a ton of Latin music in DC, but at that time there wasn't really the kind of stuff. I was really into Fort Apache and Ray Barretto and things like that, and I was like, okay, these bands don't really exist here, so I'm going to start my own band. And I had learned a lot of stuff, but I had no outlet for it. It was always like most of the music that you were playing was not like the real thing, and you had to be careful about what you played, on other people's gigs and things like that. So I was like, I'm going to start my own band, and I'm going to play what I want. And I purposely only hired a conga player to force myself to internalize these other patterns, because for me, that was really the only way that I could do it. And it wasn't really for this reason, like to be able to play a whole bunch of stuff, because who cares about that? But for me, it was the quickest way to internalize what it was that I needed, because John and I were talking earlier. I was like spending a lot more time studying percussionists than studying drum set players, because all the guys in New York that I did study with who were percussionists, that was really what I was looking to try to emulate on the drums, trying to get that kind of sound and try and be as authentic as I could with the limited amount of knowledge that I had.
Well, I had the opportunity to play in a Latin band when I was a young man, and it would be me on the drum set, and sometimes it'd be a conga player and me. Sometimes it was just me, sometimes conga, sometimes me and timbales, sometimes all three of us. So you really get into what do you need to play on the kit
Very
that covers
important.
this music, and what is everybody else playing that I don't want to step on.
Yeah, it's huge. That's huge. And and especially playing with the guys in New York, I mean, you'll be told very quickly, because a lot of times people just learn patterns. And to me, Afro-Cuban, that type of drumming is the same mindset as straight ahead as bebop drumming. You're improvising, and your ability to improvise around what it is that's happening, as opposed to playing these preset patterns where a lot of times they're ridiculous. They have nothing to do with the music, and you're trying to play a conga part and there's a conga player sitting next to you. It's like,
The more people there are, generally everybody has to do less, so the common goal comes together as one thing.
you're dead on. You're dead
Yeah.
on. And also understanding exactly what it is that they're playing, so you do play something that complements it, not rubs. Yeah, like you said, this instead of this, so.
Right.
Let me ask a simple question. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's silly. What do we mean when we say Latin music? Because there's Afro-Cuban, there's Brazilian. Is that part of it?
I mean,
There's
I was
salsa?
talking. I was talking to one of my students the other day. That's like, you go on a gig and and the leader asks you to play a Latin groove. That's like, are we going to open up the dictionary?
Bossa Nova.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think that terminology has sort of generated out of it's a safe statement for people. They say that, then it's like, but then of course if you come back and say, can you be a little more specific? Well, I guess then that depends on how bad you want to keep the gig or what the gig is. So I mean, that's what I would usually do. But I would say that by now, you would hope that more people are sort of jumping on board with understanding, the delineations within that term.
Yeah, it's
But a
like
lot
saying,
of people,
it's like saying jazz is ding, ding, a ding, ding, a
Exactly.
ding. There you go, kid. That's
Exactly.
jazz. Well,
It's kind of crazy, and also I think that in terms of composing, because I do a lot of writing and arranging, and also as when we're teaching students, getting back to talking about Ed, and the whole interpretation process, it's like students a lot of times, when they're reading these charts, and maybe the composer or the arranger, doesn't understand clave, or they don't understand these things. And if the students are equipped with the right tools to where they can sort of suss through what it is that they're looking at, I mean, the chart is like written as a samba, and it's clearly not a samba, but the student has been trained so that they don't have to make a big deal about it, and then they can just make the proper changes to make sure that the tune is cool. But I think a lot of people, at least in my experience, which I've tried to stay away from in my own playing, is not playing patterns. It's not patterns. You understand what the clave is, whatever style of music it is, and then you use the same approach that you do when you're playing straight ahead music, and you play what that tune needs. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just going to pile on here, but yeah, that Latin term, play Latin. I mean, I think that's probably, I don't know, a product of those people who have not delved into Afro-Cuban or Brazilian or Dominican, for that matter. Like merengue is from the Dominican Republic. I used to tell students, there's like 90 different countries in Latin America, so each with their own indigenous rhythms, right? And that's particularly why I went to Cuba in the 90s. And even just take one country like Cuba, you've got cha-cha-cha, you've got son, you've got guaracha, you've got dengue, you've got pilon, charanga, bolero,
Mambo.
songo, morensongo, guaguancó, Colombia.
Enchilada, burrito,
It's
you
all
name
of
it,
that
man.
stuff, and those are only
What's that in yours? Oh, sorry.
those are only the popular rhythms, and then you get into the folkloric rhythms, and it's even deeper. And so
It's extremely deep.
Now, with those guys, you play the wrong one, they're going to hand you your ass.
There's no question about that. But you know what, though? Like to piggyback on what John is saying, it's like I think that why would you like when it comes to funk and straight ahead, but why wouldn't you dive as deep into some of these other styles? It's like cats learn. Okay, man, I learned my songo, so now I'm a Latin cat. It's like what?
Right.
You got to be effing kidding me? It's like, so if you're going to take the dive as a drum set player, you're going to have to dive in all the pools and not just the couple, and I mean, if you're really interested in being able to handle, like, the amount of styles and genres that John just rattled off, and then within each one of those, we were talking about it before, it depends who you talk to. This cat says play it this way. This other one says don't play it that way. You play it this way. It's like, so you study, and at the end of the day, like, people, Joe McCarthy, the white guy from Meriden, Connecticut, has an Afro-Cuban big band. I don't give a shit what anybody thinks about what I play. I studied, and I play it my way. And if some Cuban cat doesn't like the way I play the drums in my band, don't listen to my records.
Well, one of my teachers in Cuba, his name is Jose Eladio Amat. We were in class one day, and this is the other sort of piece here too, is that if you're a percussionist in Cuba, if you're a drum set player, you study the drum set, you study the timbales, you study congas, you study guiro, you study bongo. So it's a totally different rhythm-based system in Cuba. But one day I was in class, I think it was a timbale class, with Jose. And, he would play something, and then you'd get up and try to play what he played. And I said to him, I said, yeah, but Jose, you're from here. You've been playing and listening to this all your life. And he goes, the ear doesn't know who's Cuban.
Perfectly
Good
put,
answer.
man.
Good answer.
Perfectly put.
And I was like, oh, shit.
Well, doesn't that guide us through all kinds of music? It's about when people say that guy's got big ears, they're not talking about his anatomy,
Well, I've always felt that the people I know who are the greatest musicians are the people that hear the best.
Absolutely.
100%.
And, knowing how to get inside what it is. I mean, I'm so fascinated by the Afro-Cuban music. And, then I remember when I first got a gig playing with Eliane Elias. This was like 40 years ago. And I'm thinking I know a little bit about this music. I get there, I'm ass backwards with everything. And she's tuning me up, and I'm glad
She's Brazilian, by
because
the way.
she's
Yeah.
Brazilian. So, this is like she's in there, and it was a great education for me. And, I've always felt like when I try to learn something, I want to get with the people that really are down deep in it. And you try to absorb it the best you can. I call when I try to play that Afro-Cuban, who I am. But I love all this music, and it's all, everything that I've heard has affected me.
Yep.
And, I steal from everybody, and it
Yep.
comes through here, and we try to like have it work with the people you have to play with. And a lot of times you need to make adaptations because, you may not, I may not be playing with, Andy Gonzalez or,
Yep.
somebody who's really deep in it. So we all have to try to find a way to bring it together, I
Yep.
mean, I don't know what's correct, but it usually sounds okay.
Yeah, and Adam, I've heard you play so many times, and one of the things that, like, when I think of you, when John told me that you guys were doing this was, and I remember this is you're a listening, you're a drummer who listens, a musician who plays the drums, and so
I came to the drums from music. I didn't come to music from the drums.
thank you.
And
a good
basically, drums was monkey see, monkey do. After I'd already kind of studied piano and always
Nothing wrong with
listened to
that.
music, so
That's why
we
we
had
do this.
well, thank you.
To your point, we had Steve Smith on, and he said he plays his Latin he calls Cubop because it's Cuban, but it's through the eyes of Blakey and Elvin, and we all have that jazz Latin. I remember big band parts would say quasi jazz Latin rock.
Well, I think
Okay, that's where the ears come in.
Yeah.
it's important to remember that back in the 40s and the 50s and the bebop, beginning days, that there was still an exchange between Cuba and New York, right? Havana, New York,
Yeah.
Party time.
Cubana B, Cubana Bop. And so there was,
Right.
you hear with those guys like Blakey and Elvin, their influence from the Cuban cats, right? You talk about Art Blakey's Mambo. I mean, it's got elements of tumbao on the congas, right? And then kind of a cascara on the bell. So the other point I wanted to make about that is back when I was coming up, I'm probably the elder here, we were hard pressed to find information on Brazilian or Afro-Cuban drumming. But nowadays it's like it's saturated. There's more books, more DVDs, more videos with the authentic stuff, right? I mean, Joe and I were talking about Horacio's book the other day, Conversations in Clave. But it's just like, there's no more excuse for not having the education about these ethnic.
Yeah, John Riley was talking about when we were in the 70s, we were learning there really weren't any drum set books. It was the Chapin book, and we would have to adapt stick control and syncopation and those books to the drum set.
Yep.
Whereas now it's the opposite. There's every little minute particle of it has been dissected and presented.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's why, John, both Johns, this John and John Riley, that's why his books have been so successful, because John is he's incredibly logical. I studied with him for a while, and he's like some people that try and put these books together, it's like hieroglyphics, and John he's very logical, and the stuff that he puts together, everything makes sense, because like what you were saying, Michael, about taking all of the stuff, like if you go back and look at the Chapin book, it's like, holy cow, man, it's like that's some pretty wild shit in there,
Dramatics.
some of that stuff, if you look at the notation, but it's like having the ability to be able to distill that stuff, and also coming from this John, all of you gentlemen, people that have played that are assembling these books, as opposed to people are putting this information through AI, and then it's the new drum set book. It's like, what, it's like, it's got to be based on some practicality, at least in my opinion.
I guess we're not far from having drum set books written by AI.
Stand by.
Okay, I'm going to pull up. We were talking about Along Came Betty.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just start with playing the music, and then we'll maybe talk about what's going on.
Joe could talk about a couple of things. One being your setup, right? And it's also obvious there that you're very familiar with the fact that in Cuba there's basically three cowbells that percussionists use. There's the cha-cha bell, there's the mambo bell, and there's the bongo bell. And guys at Berkeley, when they'd study with me, they'd want to delve into the Afro-Cuban thing, and I'd say, okay, well, you got to buy some cowbells. You're really gonna do it up. So talk a little bit about your setup, maybe, and what also interests me is your choices. I mean, it's so apparent the Ed Soph aspect of things with the way you interpret ensemble figures, but also just how you might spread out cascara, how you might orchestrate it, how you might weave it into, say, an ensemble figure, because it's amazing. It's like,
Thank you.
beautiful thing.
I think that well, first of all, like on those records, Robert Quintero was playing congas on that record, and Robert is a very powerful force, regardless of he can play anything, but Robert phrases more like a jazz drummer than he does like a conguero, because he's very steeped in the jazz side of things. So playing with a conga player like him allows me to sort of like loosen up a little bit, and I'm not so concerned because everybody in the rhythm section is very comfortable. But I would say, as far as the setup was concerned, that setup is certainly not a very practical setup in terms of gigging and things like that. But it made the most sense to me in terms of having the bell under the hi-hat, in terms of being in a position to where I would be relaxed. That was the main thing. Some of the grooves are kind of involved, and the thing I was most concerned about, and I learned this from everybody, was just about making sure that I was relaxed. So I would say the proximity of everything, had an enormous amount to do that, to where there was no extraneous movement whatsoever. And then also, like the two bells that were on the bass drum, I used those bells a lot, especially in 6/8, where I would be going back and forth to like the high and low tone. I would use those bells. So you had to play off of the two bells. So everything had, like my setup was constantly changing. But at that time, that's what that was. And in terms of your question about the orchestration thing, I think one of the most important things that I learned from Ed, and this also just from being around great musicians, is articulation. And so I finally realized that the band is tight when the drums exactly match the articulation of the band. And as soon as I figured that out, that was an amazing game changer for me. And the band was like really on, and I became fanatical about it, to where I would study scores extremely closely to extreme detail in terms of where I would place a note, to make sure that it was going to match the band, to make sure that you heard what the band was playing. So I didn't obliterate it with some stupid shit that was ringing when the band was playing short, And so
you're talking long notes, short notes,
100%.
Phrases that breathe, they expand, they
100%.
contract.
Yeah. And if you think about the kit in terms of tone, I think a lot of drummers don't think enough about note lengths, because everybody thinks about the attack of a note, but you have to release the note. This is where the money is on the back end of the note, because the horns, either if they tongue something, or everybody always thinks about this, you have to finish what you're playing for it to stay tight. So you can play something, but you've got to get on the back end of that, because that's where when the horns release, you have to get something underneath that. That's what gives it the thing, And that's a hard thing to explain to students sometimes, because like what Adam said earlier about being a musician who plays the drums, a lot of drummers, articulation, it's like gesundheit. What the hell are you talking about? Articulation, what is that? It's like note lengths. It's like, just play everything on the crash cymbal and play everything else on the snare drum. It's like, I don't think that's going to work out so well.
I'm going to jump in and say one little thing that really made me aware of note length more than anything was when I studied and got involved with brushes. Because you play that space between the point of impact of the note. And it makes you become aware of the width of the note or length, whatever. And by doing that, your sound is balanced by the space, and the space is balanced by the sound. And, by being aware of that, it made me more conscious, and that's what you were speaking about.
That's very well put, man. And a lot of people, because drummers are always it's always an attack. But, but then you think about people that are able to really do beautiful things with space. It's like, man, that's where the shit's happening, is in the space,
I think Dizzy said that's where the swing is, the space between the notes. And, talk about somebody that had some time.
That's also endemic to the drum itself. When we talk to little kids and you say, here's a whole note, tap, 2, 3, 4. Here's a 16th note, 1 and a 2. They don't have any length to these notes. And we have to come to terms with that eventually. I mean, you learn rolls, first of all. But when you're talking about legato, staccato, long and short, expanding, contracting, dynamically, that's a different skill altogether that doesn't come naturally from tapping a drum.
Well, so because John is here, one of the things that I learned from two people, and I use extensively in my teaching, and I have this basic training thing, and it's the use of our voice. So John studied with Alan, and Alan was a huge proponent of singing tunes in your playing. I also am so old that I went to school with cats that were studying with Gary Chester before the book came out. I was reading manuscripts from Gary Chester. This is like 1980, something like that, way back then. So I started practicing that stuff immediately. And as soon as the voice got involved, because if you think about it, one of the biggest issues that drummers have is we don't need to breathe to produce a tone. I mean, we need to breathe to stay alive. But when a horn player executes a pitch, they have to anticipate. They can't breathe when the pitch happens. They have to anticipate. And so when I was running the big band at the Naval Academy and we would rehearse, we used to rehearse in a box the way that Mincer used to record. And so I would watch the horn players before I would say anything, because I didn't conduct. I played from the drums as the leader, and I would watch everyone's breathing. And that is when I would make my comments as to where I would talk to them about articulation in terms of breathing. Then they would listen to me because they're like, oh, what the hell do you know about breathing? You just hit shit. It's like, no, I actually, so once I figured that out, the whole thing about counting with our students, that's the only way that they're really going to figure out this whole thing about what you said about playing a whole note on the snare drum. That's not going to happen. They have to understand that it's ba. Okay, now we're talking about some stuff, So then when they play the drums, they understand what part of the instrument is the long note and the short note. And so now we can start making some music and not messing around with, oh, that's a whole note, So to me, that's more important than some of the Polywana cracker stuff. It's like, you have to learn how to count while you're playing, learning forms and be able to sing tunes like what John did with Alan,
Can't sing, can't play. There's also Steve Houghton's book, and I'm sure he got this from Ed Soph. But there's a chapter in there. I think it might be Can't Sing, Can't Sing, Can't Play, where he has examples of articulations. For example, like a quarter note, right? You think a quarter note, well, it could be staccato, it could be dit, or it could be dot, or it could be da, or do, or it could be dop.
Yep.
Right? So those were very helpful for me. I think it pretty much. I think the origin is Ed Soph, but consecutive eighth notes, not that, but do ba do ba do ba do ba. Those things were really.
If you check out the beginning of Ed's book called The Drum Set Primer, it's a book of big band charts. The whole first chapter is him writing about exactly what you just talked about. And it's like everybody buys the book and then they just go to the charts.
Exactly.
So then I make them read the shit in their lesson before they get to look at it.
Read the text.
Read what he said, man. I don't care. You can't play the charts if you don't understand what he said at the beginning of the book, They don't want to read words. I just got to get to the chart. It's like, you don't know what to play.
But the other thing, which is mandatory, is listening.
100%.
Because this is the one thing that has eluded technology and everything. You can't notate feel.
Right.
100%.
You can notate information and data. You look at a Max Roach transcription or an Elvin Jones transcription. It may not be that different. Could they sound more different? You know what I mean?
You're so right. You're so right. And I also think that, one of the biggest challenges that we have now, especially with a lot of the younger people, is the immediacy, It's like you said, you're talking about listening to Elvin. It's like, man, you got to listen to fucking Elvin for like 20 years, And it's like, oh, I have a transcription of Elvin, so now I'm playing like Elvin. It's like, oh, okay, that's cool because I'm not.
No, you're not. Yeah.
So you have to, but I mean, people have to be willing to spend the time, and
it's a different orientation. It's a really different orientation now.
It's tough.
My son came up with the best line about 15 years ago, talking to my wife and I. He's 33 now. He said, I'm a digital native. You and Mom, you're digital immigrants. And
Whoa.
it's true, because the people that have grown up now, I'll Google it. I'll ask Siri. And it's like, what we do has to take time to get into the whole body. It's like, when I'm playing, the last thing I want to be doing is thinking. Yeah. I just want to be paying attention. Because if I'm thinking, I'm out of the now.
Yep.
And that's got to all be like second nature. But just like anything that we've done repeatedly, we don't think about walking now. In the beginning, we did. Talking, we don't. It's like anything. The more you do it, the more you become unconsciously competent without having to think about it. In the beginning, you do got to think about it. But the kids now, they're used to everything being instant. And it's like, sorry, baby, it doesn't work like that. You
Yeah,
know,
you're so right. That's so
it's
well said, man.
that word time. I broke the acronym down time. This I must earn. Oh,
But
yeah.
Adam, you're talking about the four stages of learning, right? Like ignorance. What's the next step? But the final step is
Unconsciously
It's,
unconscious.
unconscious.
it's,
Adam's
it's
got it.
Every step.
Dunning Kruger were the guys that
Right,
specified. You're unconsciously incompetent.
right,
You're terrible, you don't know it.
right,
Then I'm consciously incompetent. I'm
right.
terrible, but I know it. So
Consciously.
now then I'm going to become consciously competent and then unconsciously competent. You know, it's a process, man. It just keeps going. And
Not
the
to
higher
be
we get up the
Forever.
mountain, the more there is to see.
not to be
100%.
confused with the four stages of a drummer's career. You know what those are? I'll use Adam as an example. Who's Adam Nussbaum? That's the first stage. Second stage is get me Adam Nussbaum. Third stage is get me a young Adam Nussbaum. And the fourth stage is who's Adam Nussbaum?
Oh man.
But that's not true. Let's look at some of the let's look
Yeah.
at some music here, some notation. This has helped me out because I couldn't hear that listing that it was 5-4-7-4. But once I saw this, I said, oh yeah, well that makes perfectly good sense.
Took a minute.
Yeah, and now this is a pattern that you've discussed. It's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
You said basic there, and you've got 1, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Bongo bell.
Yep, there's your bell pattern. And there's another. What's the left foot? Is that another bell?
Cha-cha.
It's I think it's on that track. It was a cha bell.
Okay, and then the left hand could be anywhere on the kit and the bass drum there.
Well,
So
yeah,
anyway,
you're trying to play around with the congas they're playing and things like
Right.
that.
now let's have a look at the chart. And you see 5-4-7-4. There's a fill. You better know how to read this stuff, man, if you're going to try to play this.
Is your lead in, Joe, is your lead in a measure of 5 and a measure of 7, that nice abanico you played, extended?
Well, the way that the chart starts is the chart starts at the top with just piano.
Oh, okay.
So the first two measures are piano, and then I come in.
Oh, there's the fill, yeah.
Yeah, in the third and fourth bar, and then the top of the form is actually in the fifth bar.
I
You know,
see.
where
And then you
so-
get down here, and look at these figures, man. You got to set those up with the band while you're still keeping the Latin thing going and, negotiating through these time signatures. That's some hairy reading. This is what the studio
Well-
players describe as in the studio, it's 90% boredom, 10% terror. There's the terror right there.
Well, it's like the reason that chart ended up being like that was at the time when we were getting ready to record that record in the Navy band, we recorded one of Chris Potter's tunes, and it's a tune called 7-11, which is 7-11. And so I started checking out a lot of Chris's stuff. This is a long time ago when Chris was, he was doing a lot of, well, I'm sure he probably still is doing a lot of really very time intensive type charts. And so we started fiddling around with this, and it was very fascinating to me. And so we built the arrangement around that. But I think that, when you look at charts and they have like a bunch of stuff in them, trying to get it to the point where it doesn't sound like it's difficult at all, especially with the whole time signature thing.
Yeah.
That it's the I've been like doing a very deep study of a bunch of Hindustani Indian classical music. There's no time signatures, and this just trying to just being able to understand pulse. And spending more time on pulse than worrying so much about time signatures and where's one and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, trying to look at it from more like macro instead of micro, and then trying to suss the grooves out that way to where stuff just kind of sits down a little bit, and then you're sort of trying to play with a larger brush. You know, Adam was talking about playing with brushes, you know, but like a larger paintbrush, you know, to where your groove is kind of a little more macro. And then in terms of the figures and how it's not always setting up the figures, but it's like being able to play the figures to where, like, if you, when you listen to Mel Lewis play, Mel Lewis, the way that he worked around figures was, it just sounded like it was part of the tune.
Right.
You're not setting up everything that everybody's playing because it sounds ridiculous, you know. But Mel was such an amazing musician that, you know, what he played actually sounded like it was part of the composition, and that's absolutely. I mean, I'm certainly not Mel Lewis, but that's the way that I approach big band playing, you know. And it's not like, you know, get out da 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 da. That, you know, it's like, play the song, man. Play the song.
What's so nice listening to you, you know, negotiating these figures with this kind of groove, there's always the flow maintaining. The flow factor is always there. And it's like, for me, no matter what it is, it should never sound odd, even though it is.
Exactly.
100%. Thank
When I
you.
was listening to that, I was unconcerned with where one was.
There
I
you
just
go.
wanted to hear it float and enjoy the groove and the music and the vibe, and not mess myself. I don't want to count the damn thing. Okay, that's
Exactly.
5, that's 7, there's 5. I get
Exactly.
it, but that takes away where it hits you in the gut, you know?
No, but 100%. And like you said, you know, like you know, whether you're listening to Mahler or if you're listening to Dream Theater, whatever it is that you're listening to, it's like, you know, for me, I just want to listen to the song.
You don't want to say
No.
there's the plagal cadence.
Yeah, and
You
it's
know?
like, well, I did a half of how you doing on the, I don't care.
Right.
You know, it's like,
Where's my protractor?
it doesn't feel good. You
That's
know,
what
I
it's
think
all
that's
about.
probably the best indicator if the music is cool, I guess. You know, it's my opinion.
Well, we're all in agreement here. We're all in agreement on those things. John Ramsay, thank you for coming. Joe McCarthy, my new friend, thank you for being here. I appreciate your music.
Thank
Adam Nussbaum, my trusty co-host.
My pleasure being here with you guys. It's been an honor.
It's my honor too. So we're
I
all in this.
echo.
So the next time we'll be really at the bar at Basic, and
Sure.
it'll go deeper.
Hopefully soon.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you for
Have
coming.
fun.
Thank you very much.